Everyone, today my group will present about ABC versus traditional costing. To get the information, we do some research on a few journal and articles. My name is Hafiza binti Harosham and I will explain about introduction that is based on a case study of activity-based costing for hotline furniture manufactured Sdn Bhd. Activity-based costing, or we call as ABC, is a technique to quantitatively measure the cost and performance of activities, resources, and cost objects include, when appropriate, overhead. ABC capture overhead costs for the factor of productions and administrative expenses and applies them to the defined activity structure. ABC is a process of simplifying and clarifying decision required by the process evaluator and senior management using activity costs rather than gross allocations. ABC is a costing system that absorbs indirect manufacturing overhead to a specific product based on the activity involved in the producing the product. As far as indirect manufacturing overhead is concerned, it was incurred not directly to produce a product. Indirect manufacturing overhead for a manufacturer may include depreciation of plants and machineries, indirect labor such as supervisor levels and above, and many more. As all these indirect manufacturing overhead are not traceable to product, ABC is essential here to apply a proper basis of allocation to allocate all the indirect manufacturing costs based on the information gathered regarding resources consumed during the production process. ABC is also an essential part to improve a producing process. ABC measure process and activity performance, determine the cost of business process output, and identifies opportunity to improve the process efficiency and effectiveness. The major objective of the ABC process is to objectively determine a better way of doing business. It helps in various business functions. One of that is decision making. For a manufacturer, it is very important that the factor produce the correct product with a C label at a correct pricing, which is not underpriced as well as overpriced. Comparison can be obtained from the external sources to decide whenever the company should produce the product or outsource the product. Company might stop producing or increase the product price if a product were identified as underpriced using ABC. These are important because if the company keep on producing the product, the company will make a loss when all the indirect manufacturing overhead was charged out to the product. On the other hand, the company can afford to reduce the product price if a product has been identified as overpriced product using ABC. Hence, the proper pricing is vital for a manufacturer to sustain its existence in the industry. Ultimately, proper costing is vital as it provides information for the management to make decisions on the pricing for a product. Next, in planning and controlling. During a planning, ABC plays an important role whereby history records on the production cycle was identified and recorded. The data and information serve as very useful information for management to do the planning for the coming year on what produce is going to be produced and produced at what level. Budget purchasing and manpower planning can be determined before a new calendar year. Planning was later used as controlling tools to monitor and control the efficiency of a production's process during the year by comparing the budget with the actual performance. Corrective action can be taken such as increase produce price whenever the increase in cost is identified rather than wait until the end of the year when profit and loss accounts were generated. I will pass to the next presenter to explain more about it.
Thank you, Hafiza, for the great explanation. Now, I will talk about traditional costing. What is traditional costing? Based on Journal of Accounting, Cost System Choice and Incentives Traditional versus Activity-Based Costing, page 5, it stated that the traditional costing system is an accounting method used to determine the cost of making profits, and it is based on allocating overhead or indirect manufacturing costs. This system relies on calculating predetermined overhead rates and applying the rates to a given metric. Traditional costing systems are usually preferred when private information is characterized by low uncertainty. Next, when is traditional costing is used? Based on the Journal of Accounting, Cost System Choice and Incentive Traditional versus Activity-Based Costing. Traditional costing is best used when the overhead of a company is low compared to the direct cost of production. It gives reasonably accurate cost figures when the production volume is large, and changes in overhead costs do not create a substantial difference when calculating the cost of production. Traditional costing methods are inexpensive to implement. Companies usually use traditional costing for external reports because it is simpler and easier for outsiders to understand. However, it does not give managers an accurate picture of product costs because the application of overhead burden rate is arbitrary and applied equally to costs to all products. Overhead costs are not allocated to the products that actually consume the overhead activities. The traditional costing method is best used for manufacturers that only make a few different products. Now, I will show you an example of traditional costing. This is based on one video from YouTube titled Traditional Costing an Example. Here is an example, namely product A and product B. It says the direct materials is 4 kg per kg and 2 kg of product A is used, while 3 kg of product B is used. Next, direct labor cost is 10 ringgit per hour. It shows that products A used 1 hour of production while product B used 1.5 hour of production. Next, production overheads are estimated to be 100,000 ringgit per annum, and annual budgeted volume for product is 10,000 units and for product B is 20,000 units. Now, I will show you the solution for this question. Direct materials. For product A, as we can see from the question, it is 2 kg. So, we take 4 ringgit times 2 kg equal to 8. For product B, as the question shows, it is 3 kg. So, we take 4 ringgit times 3 kg equal to 12. Next, direct labor. As we can see from the questions, the direct labor cost is 10 ringgit. So, for product A, as the question shows, it is 1 hour. So, we take 10 ringgit times 1 hour equal to 10. While for product B, as the question shows, it used 1.5 hours. So, we take 10 ringgit times 1.5 hour equals to 15. Production overheads. So, as I have stated below, formula for overhead rate is total budgeted overhead cost for the period per total budgeted activity level for the period. First, from the questions, we have known that the budgeted overhead cost for the period is 100,000 ringgit. Total budgeted activity level for the period, we took the time times the units given. So for products A, 1 hour times 10,000 units. Thus, product B, 1.5 hour times 20,000 units. And then we sum up and we will get 2.5 ringgit per hour. After that, we time used to produce the products. For product A, it is 1 hour, so 2.5 ringgit per hour. So 2.5 times 1 equal to 2.5 ringgit. For product B, it is 1.5, so we take 2.5 ringgit times 1.5 hours, so it is equal to 3.75 ringgit. So this is the solution for these questions. Next, I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you for your amazing presentation. Hi, my name is Muhammad Suhaimi Kamruddin bin Muhammad Kamal, matrix number 284205. Now, I will be presenting about traditional costing and activity-based costing. Traditional costing and activity-based costing. For this slide, I will be presenting the three main differences between traditional costing and activity-based costing, which were commonly used worldwide by the accountants. In this part, I will be explaining the differences between traditional costing and activity-based costing methods in cost accounting. It is the most fundamental and noticeable difference between these two methods of cost accounting. I will start with traditional cost accounting, where the traditional cost accounting requires one plant-wide overhead rate to calculate the cost. What is a plant-wide overhead rate? The plant-wide overhead rate is a single overhead rate that the company uses to allocate all of its manufacturing overhead costs to products or cost objects. It is most commonly used in smaller entities with simple cost structures. For example, it's basically just calculated using machine hours or labor hours, and later just take the overhead cost and divide it by the number of machine hours or labor hours. The calculated amount will give us a value of one plant-wide overhead rate that then will apply on the basis of either labor hours or machine hours throughout the year. Meanwhile, for the activity-based costing, it requires multiple rates, which is also known as activity rates. As we can remember, we are going to have a number of cost pools in the activity-based costing. What is cost pools? Cost pools are the amount of money spent on an activity, for instance, customer service or manufacturing. Cost pools are used in activity-based costing to accurately determine where the money is spent rather than splitting the overhead costs equally over all departments. With activity-based costing, we will put overhead costs and other items into the cost pools and then calculate an activity rate for each of these pools. Basically, traditional costing, however, is just going to have one plant-wide overhead rate that is used to allocate overhead rate, rather than activity-based costing, which requires multiple activity rate. Costing and activity-based costing is that the traditional costing is much easier to implement compared to activity-based costing. The reason is because if we wanted to have a costing system, it's easier to calculate one rate rather than the multiple ones. But in addition to that, it's not just doing division for calculating a rate, but it's actually the activity-based costing involves on what items should be going into the cost pools, which cost pools should we have, and lastly, making estimation about the number of orders from different items. In conclusion, activity-based costing is a very complex system and going to be much more difficult to implement. Another important difference between traditional costing and activity-based costing is that traditional costing only allocates product cost. Meanwhile, for activity-based costing, may allocate the period cost. When we are talking about allocating overhead, we are talking about a manufacturing overhead with traditional costing. On the other hand, activity-based costing is actually more about period costs. Period costs are all costs not included in product costs. Period costs are not directly tied to the production process. Overhead or sales, general and administrative SG&A costs, selling expenses, advertising expenses, travel and entertainment expenses, commissions and depreciation expenses are considered period costs. So basically, traditional costing is just allocating product costs, and period costs is just going to be expenses incurred and not really allocating those to product lines. All of the ideas and points that were generated for my part came from a YouTube video published by Adspira on 13th November 2014 entitled Traditional Costing versus Activity-Based Costing. and also an article named Strategic 4 written by Dan that was published on July 23rd, 2013. The link of references were provided at the end of the slide.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurul Afizani bin Rosli. My metric number is 284309. Thank you Suhaimi for the presentation, and I will continue under the same topic, traditional costing versus activity-based costing. The difference between these two methods can be seen by use for external reports. Traditional costing can use for external reports. What I mean is by calculating cost of goods sold and not like income statement, financial statement and other reports. So we can use traditional costing to compute cost of goods sold, and the auditors will accept those methods, but not for activity-based costing. Since activity-based costing system generally provides more accurate product cost than traditional costing method, why isn't it used for external reports? So, activity-based costing is a lot more subjective and it's just strictly for internal report. Some companies do use activity-based costing in their external reports, but most do not. There are a number of reasons for this. First, external reports are less detailed than internal reports prepared for decision making. On the external reports, individual product costs are not reported. Cost of goods sold and inventory valuations are disclosed, but there is no breakdown of these accounts by product. If some products are under cost and some are over cost, the errors tend to cancel each other when the product costs are added together. Second, it is often very difficult to make changes in a company's accounting system. The official cost accounting system is most large companies are usually embedded in complex computer programs that have been modified in-house over the course of many years. It is extremely difficult to make changes in such computer programs without causing numerous bugs. Third, an accounting system does not perform to generally accepted accounting principle, which is GAAP. Product cost complete for external reports purposes must include all the manufacturing costs and on the non-manufacturing costs. But in ABC system, products cost exclude some manufacturing costs and include some non-manufacturing costs. It is possible to adjust the ABC data at the end of the period to conform to GAAP, but it requires more work. The second point is work requirements. If we implement ABC system, we must continue then to have a traditional costing system so that we can continue to calculate cost of goods sold. Thus, if the company going to use ABC, the company going to have two sets of books. What I mean we're going to have two sets of books is we're still doing traditional costing at the same time. For example, the company will have one tab Excel where will be the calculation of cost of goods sold by the traditional method for the auditors, but for the internal purpose, we're going to have second set of books where we actually have our activity-based costing figures and calculations. So we actually will have two different sets of profit margins, two different sets of costs. So we're going to have two systems here, the ABC and the traditional costing. On the other hand, if the company uses traditional costing, that would be sufficient. The last point is accuracy. So you might be wondering at this point why we basically look at a bunch of negatives and why would anybody want to implement ABC for their firm. The main driver of doing ABC is simply the fact that it's much more accurate. We're kind of going back to this notion of just taking one black white overhead rate when we're just going to say that overhead is just driving by machine hours, and that's really all we care about when we're costing our specific product. Have you ever thought, what if this one product is having all kinds of issues and it's causing people to burn out and talk to our customer support people? In that case, we would be understating our cost if we didn't allocate to that product line. Or for example, a certain product requires a lot more orders or something than the other product, and those type of things based on one rate that was with our machine hours, and we're just doing this because it's easy. That's the advantage of traditional costing. It's easy. It's acceptable for GAAP, for calculating cost of goods sold. when we really want to make decisions, which is what cost accounting is all about. ABC is really the method that's going to give us the most accurate cost.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Nurin Imanina binti Amran with matrix number 284279. I will continue our presentation, which is ABC or traditional costing, which one is better. Our group has decided that activity-based costing or ABC will be the best and relevant method of costing to be used these days. Although traditional costing systems are much simpler and easier to implement, it is not as accurate as ABC system, as it can result in significant undercosting and overcosting. Activity-based costing systems are more accurate because they provide a more precise breakdown of indirect costs. It specifically identifies the activities that cause production costs to increase and helping team leaders make more informed pricing and manufacturing strategies. Besides, this method helps businesses to make more informed decisions about which products to produce or help them find a cheaper methods of production. This slide has no reference as this is our own opinion. During our research, we found out that traditional costing methods don't always work in certain industries, such as the service industry. This is because service industry have minimal direct costs, so these industries will use activity-based since they apply the cost directly to the type of service. Reference from Activity-Based Costing, Advantages, Definition and When to Use, 2022. However, ABC can be more time-consuming and require a lot of resources to gather the accurate data. From here, we can see that both of this method, which is ABC and traditional costing, has their own advantages and disadvantages. It's important for the organization to know clearly what they require prior to deciding on which costing method they should use. Organizations need to study the pros and cons of each costing method to know which one was more accurate and appropriate for their organization. There is no such thing that as the best costing method. There is only the most suitable costing method to use. So what are the steps of activity-based costing? The first step in ABC is to identify those costs that we want to allocate. This is the most critical step in the entire process since we do not want to waste time with an excessively broad project scope. Step 2. Load secondary cost pools. Create cost pools for those costs incurred to provide service to other parts of the company rather than directly supporting a company's product or services. The contents of secondary cost pools typically include computer services and administrative salaries and similar costs. These costs are later allocated to other cost pools that more directly relate to products and services. Step 3. Load primary cost pools. Create a set of cost pools for those costs more closely aligned with the production of goods or services. It is very common to have separate cost pools for each product line since costs tend to occur at this level. Such costs can include research and development, advertising, procurement, and distribution. Similarly, you might consider creating cost pools for each distribution channel or for each facility. If production batches are of greatly varying lengths, then consider creating cost pools at the batch level so that you can adequately assign cost based on batch size. Step 4. Measure activity drivers. Use a data collection system to collect information about the activity drivers that are used to allocate the cost in secondary cost pools to primary cost pools, as well as to allocate the cost in primary cost pools to cost objects. It can be expensive to accumulate activity driver information, so use activity drivers for which information is already being collected where possible. Or, if you have a choice of activity drivers, use the one for which the associated data collection cost is the lowest. Reference from Accounting Tools 2022. The next step is to allocate costs in secondary pools to primary pools. Step 6. Charge cost to cost objects. Use an activity driver to allocate the contents of each primary cost pool to cost object. There will be a separate activity driver for each cost pool. To allocate the cost, divide the total cost in each cost pool by the total amount of activity in the activity driver to establish the cost per unit of activity. Then, allocate the cost per unit to the cost objects based on their use of the activity driver. Step 7. Convert the result of the ABC system into reports for management consumption. For example, if the system was originally designed to accumulate overhead information by geographical sales region, then report on revenues earned in each region, all direct costs, and the overhead derived from the ABC system. Step 8. Act on the information. The most common management reaction to an ABC report is to reduce the quantity of activity drivers used by each cost object. Doing so should reduce the amount of overhead costs being used. It can be useful for the controller to monitor the actions taken by management in response to ABC reports. If management is no longer taking any action, then it may be necessary to shut down the ABC reporting system. Otherwise, the company is incurring a reporting cost without benefiting from any action to enhance operations. Reference from Accounting Tools 2022.